They called her ugly. Not behind closed doors, openly, cruelly, as if saying it enough times would make her disappear. And when a wealthy rancher from the Montana Territory sent word he wanted a bride, Meilin Zhao's family saw their chance. They promised him beauty, elegance, a prize. But when they discovered Caleb Hart was just a poor, solitary man living on the edge of nowhere, they changed their plan. They sent Meilin instead, the unwanted daughter, the family's shame. A deliberate insult wrapped in silk and spite. They were certain he'd send her back. But before we begin, help us see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so we can watch this journey spread across the map. Now, let's begin. The trading post stood alone against the Wyoming winter like a defiant fist raised at the sky. Snow had been falling since dawn, thick and relentless, turning the world into a blur of white and gray. Inside, the potbelly stove glowed red, but the warmth stopped well short of the corner where Meilin Zhao sat on her wooden trunk, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the rough plank floor. She could hear them laughing. Her father's voice carried easily across the crowded room, loud, confident, performing for the assembled trappers and traders who'd gathered to witness what everyone assumed would be spectacular humiliation. "My daughter," he announced in thickly accented English, gesturing toward Meilin without actually looking at her. "Very obedient, very quiet, make good wife for working man." The way he said working man dripped with contempt. Beside him, Meilin's stepsister Yun stood draped in emerald silk that had no place in this rough frontier outpost. She pressed a perfumed handkerchief to her nose as if the very air offended her, then leaned close to whisper something to her mother. Both women laughed behind their hands, their eyes sliding toward Meilin with undisguised malice. Meilin kept her gaze down, but her fingers tightened in her lap. This had been their plan from the beginning. 3 months ago, when the letter first arrived at their San Francisco mansion, her father had erupted in excitement, a wealthy rancher from the Montana Territory, seeking a refined Chinese bride. A man of property and means, the letter suggested, someone looking to establish a legacy. Her father had seen opportunity, a connection to expanding Western wealth, perhaps even influence over valuable land. For 2 weeks, the household had buzzed with preparation. Yun had been fitted for traveling clothes, tutored in modest behavior, coached on how to appear demure while cataloging a man's assets. The wedding would be a triumph, they'd declared. The beginning of the Zhao family's expansion into the American frontier. Then the second letter arrived. The rancher wasn't wealthy. He owned land, yes, but he worked it himself. No servants, no grand house, just a solitary man running cattle on remote acreage, barely scraping by, living in what the letter carefully termed modest circumstances. The excitement died instantly. Yun had wept with rage at the thought of being sent to such a man. Her mother had called the whole arrangement an insult to their family's status. And Meilin's father, pragmatic as always, had seen a different opportunity, a way to rid himself of his disappointing first daughter while technically honoring the contract. "We send Meilin," he'd announced at dinner that night, chopsticks pointing at her like an accusation. "The contract says daughter. It does not say which daughter." Around the table, the family had erupted in laughter. "Brilliant," her stepmother had breathed. "He'll take one look at her and send her back. Then we can claim he broke the agreement. And keep the bride price he already sent," Yun added, clapping her hands. Meilin had said nothing. She'd learned years ago that protest only made things worse. So here she sat, 3 months later, in a trading post at the edge of civilization, wearing the thin pink dress they'd deliberately chosen. Too light for the weather, too fine for frontier life, designed to make her look even more out of place than usual. The deliberate cruelty of it still took her breath away. They'd even insisted she bring only one small trunk, forcing her to leave behind the few possessions she valued. The jade bracelet her birth mother had left her, the books she'd collected, the warm cloak she'd sewn herself. "A poor rancher's wife needs nothing fancy," her stepmother had said sweetly, watching servants carry away Meilin's things. "Simple girls need simple belongings." The trading post door banged open, letting in a gust of snow and freezing air. Every head turned. A man stood in the doorway, so tall he had to duck slightly beneath the frame. He wore a heavy sheepskin coat crusted with snow, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, and boots that had seen serious wear. For a long moment he simply stood there, snow swirling around him, his face shadowed. Then he stepped inside and pulled the door shut behind him. The room fell silent. Meilin's father moved forward, hand extended, smile wide and false. "Ah, you must be Mr. Hart. Welcome, welcome. I am Zhao Wei, and this—" He gestured grandly toward Yun. "This is my daughter, the bride we promised you. Beautiful, yes? Educated, refined, everything a man could want." The tall man's gaze moved slowly across the room, taking in the assembled crowd, the expensive luggage piled near the stove, the two overdressed women preening near the fire. Then his eyes found Meilin. She felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with a weathered face that spoke of years in harsh sun and harder winters. Dark hair touched with premature gray at the temples, strong jaw shadowed with several days of stubble, eyes the color of slate, watchful and intelligent. Those eyes studied her for a long moment, taking in the inadequate dress, the careful way she held herself, the isolation of her corner. Something shifted in his expression. "That your daughter?" He spoke for the first time, his voice low and rough from disuse, the words directed at Zhao Wei, but his gaze still on Meilin. Zhao Wei's smile faltered. No, that is Meilin, my first daughter, from my first marriage. She is just here to attend to her sister. The real bride is—" "The letter said you were sending your daughter." Caleb Hart's voice cut through the explanation like an axe through kindling. Didn't specify which one, but the room went very still. Zhao Wei's face began to redden. "Surely you don't mean, Mr. Hart, there has been some confusion. The bride we prepared for you is Yun. She is beautiful, accomplished, from the finest—" "Contract said daughter." Caleb's eyes hadn't left Meilin. "That her trunk?" "Yes, but then the agreement stands." The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. Meilin's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. Across the room, Yun made a strangled sound of outrage. Her stepmother grabbed Zhao Wei's arm, hissing urgently in Cantonese. Zhao Wei's face had gone from red to purple. "Mr. Hart, I must insist, this is clearly not what either of us intended. Meilin she is not suitable. Look at her. She is plain. She is difficult. She has no skills that would benefit a man of your—" She got a name. It wasn't a question. "What? Yes, Meilin, but she's sick? Simple-minded? Got some condition I should know about?" "No, of course not, but her appearance appears to me like she's standing in a corner wearing a summer dress in a snowstorm while her family parades around in furs." Caleb's tone remained flat, but something dangerous edged into it. "Appears to me like maybe I'm not the only one who didn't get what he expected from this arrangement." Zhao Wei sputtered, caught between maintaining the fiction and defending his decision. "Now see here. The lady got anything to say about this?" Caleb turned his attention fully to Meilin now. "You want to marry me?" Every eye in the trading post fixed on her. Meilin felt her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. He was supposed to be horrified, insulted. He was supposed to send her back, giving her family exactly what they wanted, the moral high ground and the returned bride price. Instead, this quiet rancher was offering her a choice. No one had ever offered her a choice before. She thought of the mansion in San Francisco, the years of being invisible except when they needed someone to blame, the casual cruelty of her stepmother, the vicious mockery from Yun, her father's profound indifference to everything about her except how she reflected on his status. She thought of the jade bracelet they'd confiscated, the books they'd burned because too much reading makes girls difficult, the countless small humiliations that had taught her to make herself smaller, quieter, less. Then she looked at the man standing in the doorway, snow melting on his shoulders, offering her something no one else ever had: honesty. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, but clear enough to carry. "I'll marry you." The trading post erupted. Yun shrieked about the injustice. Her stepmother launched into rapid-fire Cantonese, demanding Zhao Wei do something. Several trappers began laughing and placing bets on how long the marriage would last. The post-trader started calling for order, his voice lost in the chaos. Through it all, Caleb Hart stood perfectly still, watching Meilin with those steady gray eyes. Then he crossed the room in 3 long strides, picked up her trunk with one hand as if it weighed nothing, and gestured toward the door. "We should go. Storm's getting worse." "You cannot do this." Zhao blocked their path, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. "The contract was for a suitable bride. This is fraud." "The contract," Caleb said quietly, "specified your daughter in exchange for the bride price, which I paid in full 6 weeks ago." "You didn't specify which daughter. Your mistake, not mine." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried across the now silent room. "Though I'm starting to think I got the better end of this deal." He stepped around Zhao Wei, who seemed too shocked to respond, and held the door open for Meilin. She stood, her legs shaking, and walked toward him. As she passed her family, Yun grabbed her arm with painful force. "You'll regret this," she hissed in Cantonese. "You think this changes anything? You're still ugly, still worthless. He'll realize his mistake in a week and throw you out into the snow, and we won't take you back." Meilin met her stepsister's eyes directly for the first time in years. "Good," she said in English, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "I don't want to come back." She pulled free and walked out into the storm. The wagon was smaller than she'd expected, a simple buckboard with a canvas cover stretched over wooden ribs, already loaded with supplies from the trading post. 2 sturdy horses stood patient in their traces, their breath steaming in the frigid air. Caleb secured her trunk in the back with practiced efficiency, then reached up to help her onto the seat. His hands were work-roughened but gentle, and he held her steady as she settled onto the bench. "Here." He shrugged out of his sheepskin coat and draped it around her shoulders before she could protest. The weight of it, the warmth still clinging to the wool, felt like an embrace. "That dress won't get you 10 miles in this weather." "But you'll freeze. It got layers." He swung up beside her, taking the reins in gloved hands. "I've survived worse than this." He clicked to the horses and they lurched forward, the wagon wheels crunching through fresh snow. Meilin pulled the coat tighter around herself, breathing in the scent of leather and wood smoke, and something else. Sage, maybe? Or prairie grass. Behind them, the trading post grew smaller, its lit windows glowing orange against the white landscape. She didn't look back. They rode in silence for nearly an hour. The only sounds, the creak of wagon wheels, the jingle of harness, and the constant whisper of falling snow. The world had contracted to a small sphere of visibility, everything beyond 10 feet dissolving into white. Meilin had 1,000 questions. Where was the ranch? How far? What would her life be like there? Why had he chosen her when any fool could see Yun was prettier? But the silence didn't feel hostile. If anything, it felt peaceful. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, Caleb spoke. "There's bread and cheese in the basket under your feet, and a canteen of water. You should eat something." "What about you?" "I'll eat when we stop to rest the horses." Meilin found the basket and unwrapped the simple meal: coarse bread, sharp cheese, dried apples. She broke the bread in half and held one piece out to him. "Then we'll both eat now." For the first time, she saw something that might have been a smile touch the corner of his mouth. He took the bread. They ate while the wagon rolled on through the gathering dusk, and Meilin realized she was tasting food for the first time in months. In her father's house, meals had been tense, carefully orchestrated affairs where every bite felt like a test she was failing. This, simple food shared in simple silence, felt like freedom. "Name's Caleb," he said eventually. "Caleb Hart. Guess we skipped the introductions back there." "Meilin Zhao." She paused. "Or Meilin Hart now, I suppose. We'll get properly married when we reach town. Won't be for a few weeks, though. Roads are too bad to risk it now." He glanced at her. "That all right with you?" The question surprised her. "You're asking my opinion? It's your marriage, too." Something tight in Meilin's chest began to loosen. "A few weeks is fine." They lapsed back into silence, but it felt different now. Less like strangers forced together, more like two people learning the shape of each other's quiet. As true darkness fell, Caleb guided the wagon off the main trail toward a stand of cottonwoods that offered some shelter from the wind. He'd clearly used this spot before. There was a fire ring already built, and he had camp set up with efficient speed. A canvas lean-to strung between trees, bedrolls laid out on either side of the fire, coffee pot hanging from a tripod, the horses unhitched and hobbled where they could reach the grass beneath the snow. Meilin stood uncertain, the sheepskin coat still wrapped around her, watching him work. "You know how to start a fire?" he asked, not looking up from his task. "Yes." "Wood's there. Kindling's in that box. I'll tend the horses." It was something to do with her hands, something useful. Meilin knelt by the fire ring and began arranging the wood the way her mother, her real mother, had taught her years ago. Small pieces first, building a structure for the air to flow through. She struck the flint and steel, coaxing sparks into the dry grass tinder until a small flame caught. By the time Caleb returned from checking the horses, she had a respectable fire burning. He studied it for a moment, then nodded once. "Good. You've done that before." "My mother taught me, before she died." "When was that?" "I was 8. He settled onto a log across the fire from her, pulling out supplies to make a simple stew. "My mother died when I was 12, left me and my father to run the ranch ourselves. It must have been hard." "It was." He measured coffee grounds into the pot with careful attention. "But it taught me to value the things that matter, the work, the land, the quiet." Meilin watched him work, this strange man who'd chosen her over her beautiful stepsister. "Why did you do it?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Do what?" "Choose me. You saw Yoon. She's everything your letter said you wanted. Beautiful, refined, educated. And I'm—" She faltered. "You're what they told you to be?" Caleb's eyes met hers across the fire. "Or what you actually are?" The question hit like a physical blow. Meilin couldn't answer. "I've lived alone for 8 years, Caleb continued quietly. Built that ranch from nothing with my own hands. Survived winters that killed weaker men. Learned to read the land, the animals, the weather." He poured water into the coffee pot. "You know what I learned most of all?" Meilin shook her head. "How to see what's real, not what people want you to see. What's actually there?" He added beans and dried meat to the pot. "Your family spent an hour putting on a show back there. Expensive clothes. Fancy words. Your sister preening like a peacock. Your father making promises about refinement and education." "She is refined. She is educated." "Maybe. But you know what else she is?" He met her eyes directly. "Someone who'd rather freeze to death than spend 5 minutes in weather like this. Someone who looked at that trading post like she was stepping in horse shit. Someone who'd make my life hell, trying to turn my ranch into some kind of palace." He stirred the pot, the firelight playing across his weathered face. "Then I looked at you, sitting in the corner in a dress that wouldn't keep a rabbit warm, holding yourself together while your family sold you like livestock. Not crying, not begging, just enduring." "That's not strength," Meilin whispered. "That's just cowardice. I didn't fight back. I never fight back." "You said yes." The words stopped her cold. "When I asked if you'd marry me," Caleb continued, "you could have said no. Could have made me the villain. Could have gone back to San Francisco with your family and at least had a roof over your head. But you looked me in the eye and you said yes to a man you'd never met, to a life you knew nothing about, to a future that could have been anything." He ladled stew into 2 tin bowls and held one out to her. "That's not cowardice. That's courage." Meilin took the bowl with shaking hands. No one had ever called her courageous before. They ate in silence as snow continued to fall beyond their small shelter. The stew was simple but well made, beans and meat and onions cooked until the flavors married together. Honest food, Meilin thought, like everything else about this man. When they finished, Caleb banked the fire and gestured to the bedrolls. "You take that side, I'll take this one. Fire'll keep us warm enough through the night." Meilin settled into her bedroll, still wearing the sheepskin coat. Across the fire, Caleb had already rolled onto his side, his back to her, his breathing evening out. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the night sounds of the frontier, wind in the cottonwoods, horses shifting in their hobbles, the occasional crack of ice forming on the stream somewhere nearby. For the first time in 10 years, she wasn't sleeping under her father's roof. For the first time in her life, she'd made a choice that was entirely her own. The fear would come later, she knew, the doubt, the wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. But tonight, wrapped in a stranger's coat, warmed by a fire she'd built with her own hands, Meilin Zhao allowed herself to feel something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. The lean-to was gone, packed away with military efficiency. Caleb had the horses already hitched to the wagon, their breath steaming in the early morning air. The fire had been built up again, and he was cooking breakfast on a flat stone he'd positioned in the coals. "Morning," he said without looking up. "We've got hard riding ahead. Eat something substantial." Meilin emerged from her bedroll, her muscles aching from the unfamiliar sleeping arrangement and the cold. The pink dress looked even more ridiculous in the morning light, wrinkled, stained at the hem, completely inadequate. She accepted the plate of bacon and pan bread, eating while Caleb efficiently dismantled the camp. Everything he did was economical, purposeful. No wasted motion, no unnecessary words. It should have felt cold. Instead, it felt like watching someone who knew exactly who he was and what he was meant to do. Within 20 minutes, they were back on the trail, the morning sun breaking through gaps in the clouds to illuminate a landscape of impossible vastness. Rolling plains stretched in every direction, broken by distant mountains that looked close enough to touch, but were probably days away. "How far to the ranch?" Meilin asked. "2 more days if the weather holds. 3 if it doesn't." "You live very far from everything." "That's the idea." Kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Nearest town is Redemption, about 15 miles north of my land. Go there maybe once a month for supplies. Otherwise, it's just me and the cattle and whatever the land provides." "That sounds—" She searched for the right word. "Lonely." "It is." He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "Been that way since my father passed. Always figured if I married, it'd be to someone who could handle the isolation. Someone strong enough not to need constant company or entertainment or society." He glanced at her. "Your sister would have lasted about 3 days before demanding I take her back to civilization." "You don't know that." "I do." Something that might have been humor touched his voice. "Saw her face when she looked at me. Same face my mother used to make when the privy needed cleaning." Despite everything, Meilin felt a laugh escape, a small, surprised sound she tried to stifle. Caleb's expression didn't change, but she could have sworn she saw satisfaction in his eyes. They traveled through the morning as the sun climbed higher, burning off the clouds. The landscape shifted gradually from heavy snow to lighter coverage, the wind sweeping the plains clear in places to reveal brown grass beneath. Meilin found herself studying Caleb from the corner of her eye. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense. His face was too weathered, too stern, but there was something compelling about him. The quiet competence, the way he read the land like other men read books, the complete absence of cruelty in everything he did. "Can I ask you something?" she ventured. "Go ahead." "The letter you sent to my father, you said you wanted a refined bride, someone educated. Why?" Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My mother was educated. From back east originally, Boston. Came out here when she married my father, gave up everything for this hard life." He adjusted his grip on the reins. "Before she died, she made me promise something. Said the ranch needed more than just hard work. Said it needed culture, beauty, things she'd tried to bring but couldn't maintain alone. So you wanted to honor her memory?" "Thought I did." His jaw tightened. "But after she passed, I realized something. She'd been lonely out here. Not because the land was harsh or the work was hard, but because my father never really saw her, never valued what she tried to bring to the place. He loved her, sure, but he didn't understand her." He fell silent again, and Meilin waited. "When I wrote that letter," he finally continued, "I was looking for what I thought my mother had been. Refined, educated, cultured. Figured that would make her happy somehow. Make up for failing her while she was alive." He shook his head. "But sitting in that trading post yesterday, watching your family perform, I realized I'd been looking for the wrong thing." "What do you mean?" "My mother wasn't special because she was refined. She was special because she was strong enough to choose this life and make it her own, to find beauty in hard places, to build something from nothing." He looked at Meilin directly. "That's what I saw in you, not refinement, strength." The words settled into Meilin's chest like stones into deep water, heavy and permanent. No one had ever seen strength in her before. They rode on through the afternoon, stopping once to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch. Caleb pointed out landmarks as they traveled, a particular rock formation that meant they were halfway to the ranch, a creek bed that flooded in spring, a stand of aspens where elk gathered in autumn. He was teaching her, Meilin realized, giving her the knowledge she'd need to navigate this new world. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink, Caleb guided the wagon toward another sheltered spot. This one had a more permanent feel, a rough lean-to structure built against a rock face, a stone fire pit, even a small cache of firewood stacked under a tarp. "I built this about 5 years ago," he explained, helping her down from the wagon. "Use it when I'm moving cattle between pastures. Easier than camping rough every time." The shelter was simple but solid, offering real protection from the wind. While Caleb tended the horses, Meilin explored the small space. Someone, Caleb obviously, had left basic supplies, a few dented pots, some rope, a coffee grinder, small comforts that spoke of a man who planned ahead. She started the fire without being asked, using the skills her mother had taught her. Then she found the coffee grinder and set about preparing the evening's coffee, measuring grounds the way she'd watched Caleb do it the night before. When he returned, he stopped in the entrance to the shelter, taking in the fire, the coffee, her purposeful movements. "You don't need to do that," he said quietly. "I know." Meilin looked up at him. "I want to." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a release of tension she hadn't known he was carrying. "All right then." They prepared dinner together in comfortable silence. Caleb produced fresh meat from the cold box in the wagon, rabbit he'd trapped that morning while she slept. Meilin watched how he skinned and prepared it, filing away the knowledge for later. He showed her how to wrap the meat in wild onions and herbs before burying it in the coals, a method that would cook it slowly through the evening. While they waited for the food to cook, Meilin asked questions. About the ranch, about the land, about what her days would look like. Caleb answered each one with the same patient thoroughness, never making her feel stupid for not knowing, never suggesting her questions were intrusive. "You'll have your own space in the cabin," he said, poking at the fire. "Bedroom's separate from the main room. I built a good stove that keeps the whole place warm. There's a root cellar for food storage, a chicken coop, small barn for the horses, and milk cow." "A milk cow?" "Bessie. She's old and mean and gives milk like she's doing you a personal favor, but she's reliable." The corner of his mouth quirked. "You'll get along fine." "What will my responsibilities be?" Caleb looked at her carefully. "That depends. What do you want them to be?" The question caught her off guard. In her father's house, responsibilities had been assigned as punishments: cleaning Yoon's room, mending her stepmother's clothes, cooking meals for a family that complained about everything she made. "I don't know," she admitted. "Well," Caleb unwrapped the rabbit to check its progress. "I handle the cattle, the heavy repairs, the field work, but the house needs tending. The chickens need someone to collect eggs and keep their coop clean. The garden, if you want one, needs planting come spring, cooking and preserving food for winter, mending and sewing." He paused. "But those aren't demands. They're offers, I guess. Ways you could shape your place here if you want. And if I can't do those things, if I'm not good at them, then you learn." He said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. "I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for partnership." Partnership. The word hung in the air between them, full of possibility. They ate the rabbit with pan bread and the last of the cheese, and Meilin had to admit it was the best meal she'd tasted in years. Something about the simplicity of it, the honesty. Food earned and prepared and shared without pretense. After dinner, as they sat by the fire drinking coffee, Caleb surprised her by producing a small leather bag from his coat. "Almost forgot." He handed it to her. "Found this in your trunk this morning when I was securing the load. Fell out when everything shifted during the storm." Meilin opened the bag and her breath caught. Her mother's jade bracelet. The one her stepmother had confiscated. The one she'd mourned as lost. "How?" "Saw your stepmother wearing it yesterday at the trading post," Caleb said quietly. "When she turned to talk to your father, I lifted it off her wrist. Figure it's yours by right." Meilin stared at him, unable to form words. He'd stolen from her stepmother. He'd seen the bracelet, understood what it meant, and simply taken it back. "She'll be furious," she managed. "She'll be too embarrassed to admit she got robbed by a poor rancher to do anything about it." Caleb's expression was completely neutral. "Besides, they'll never prove I took it." Could have lost it anywhere between here and San Francisco. Meilin slipped the bracelet onto her wrist, feeling the cool weight of the jade against her skin. Her mother's bracelet. The last physical connection to the woman who'd loved her unconditionally. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome." They sat in silence as the fire burned low, and Meilin realized something that should have terrified her, but somehow didn't. She trusted this man. This stranger she'd known for barely 2 days. This quiet rancher who spoke more through actions than words. This person who'd seen value in her when her own family saw only shame. She trusted him more than she'd ever trusted anyone. The third day of travel dawned clear and cold, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. Caleb woke her before sunrise, and they were on the trail as the first light touched the mountains. "We'll reach the ranch by afternoon if we keep good pace," he said, his breath steaming. "You ready?" Meilin nodded, pulling the sheepskin coat tighter around herself. She was wearing her own dress again. The thin pink thing was hopeless, but Caleb had given her 2 of his shirts to layer underneath for warmth. They were absurdly large on her, but they worked. As they traveled, the landscape began to change. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills, then to a wide valley cradled between mountain ridges. A frozen creek wound through the valley bottom, its banks lined with cottonwoods and willows. "That's Hart Creek," Caleb said, gesturing. "Runs year-round. Never seen it go dry, even in drought years. That's why my father chose this land." Meilin could see why. Even in winter, even under snow, the valley had a kind of austere beauty. She tried to imagine it in spring, with the creek running full and the grass green and wildflowers blooming. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's hard," Caleb corrected, but not unkindly. "Beautiful, yes, but hard. The winters try to kill you, the summers bake everything dry. The wind never stops. The work is endless." He paused. "But it's mine. Built it with my own hands, same as my father did. Every fence post, every stone in the foundation. It's honest work on honest land." As they crested a rise, he pulled the wagon to a stop and pointed. "There." Meilin followed his gesture and saw it. A cabin nestled in the valley below, smoke rising from its chimney. It was small but solid-looking, built from logs that had weathered to gray. A barn stood nearby, and she could see fenced pastures spreading out in several directions. Beyond the cabin, protected by a windbreak of trees, she spotted what looked like a garden plot under the snow. It wasn't grand, it wasn't elegant, it wasn't anything like the mansion in San Francisco, but it looked like home. "Someone's there," Meilin said, noticing the smoke. "That'll be my neighbor, Tom Breslin. Asked him to keep an eye on the place while I was gone. Probably got the stove going to keep the pipes from freezing." Caleb clicked to the horses. "Good man. You'll meet him soon enough." They descended into the valley, the wagon following a well-worn track. As they approached the cabin, a man emerged, older than Caleb, with a salt and pepper beard and a weathered face that creased into a smile. "Caleb! About damn time!" He caught sight of Meilin, and his eyebrows rose. "Well now, I'll be damned. You actually found yourself a bride." "Tom, this is Meilin. Meilin, Tom Breslin, runs cattle about 5 miles east of here." Tom swept his hat off and gave Meilin a courtly bow that looked ridiculous coming from his rough frame. "Ma'am, welcome to the territory. Hope you know what you're getting into with this one. He's surlier than a bear in spring." "I've noticed," Meilin said, and was rewarded with surprised laughter from both men. "Oh, she'll do fine," Tom declared. "Any woman who can sass Caleb hard on the 3rd day is tougher than she looks." He sobered slightly. "Got the cabin warm for you. Stocked the wood box. Your cattle all came through the storm fine. Counted them this morning." "Appreciate it, Tom." "Happy to help." Tom replaced his hat and mounted his horse. "I'll leave you two to settle in. But you come by for dinner sometime soon, here? My Sarah's been dying to meet the woman who finally got you to the altar." He rode off with a wave, and Caleb helped Meilin down from the wagon. "Ready to see your new home?" Meilin looked at the cabin, her cabin now, and took a deep breath. "Yes." Caleb opened the door and stepped aside to let her enter first. The cabin was simple but well made. The main room held a large stone fireplace with a good fire burning, a solid wooden table with 4 chairs, and a kitchen area with a proper iron stove. Shelves lined one wall stocked with supplies. Windows let in good light. The floor was wood plank, swept clean. 2 doors led off the main room. Caleb gestured to the left. That's the bedroom. It's yours. I've been sleeping in the loft since my father passed. He pointed to a ladder leading to an upper space. Gives us both privacy. Meilin opened the bedroom door and found a simple space with a real bed. Not a cot, but an actual bed with a frame and mattress, covered in quilts. A dresser, a washstand. A window looking out toward the mountains. It was small and plain and perfect. There's a trunk at the foot of the bed with some things my mother left, Caleb said from the doorway. Dresses mostly. They might fit you, or you could alter them. They're yours now if you want them. Meilin opened the trunk and found fabric. Good fabric in practical colors. Dark blues and browns and greens, the kind of cloth that would survive frontier life. Not the fragile silks of her father's house, but honest material for honest work. Thank you, she said, running her hand over the folded cloth. I'll bring in your trunk and unload the supplies. Caleb retreated, giving her space. Meilin sat on the edge of the bed, testing its firmness, and looked around her room. Her bedroom. Her space in a house that was slowly becoming hers. Through the open door she could hear Caleb moving around, the thud of her trunk being set down, the clink of supplies being stored, normal sounds of a home being tended. She stood and returned to the main room where Caleb was organizing the supplies they'd bought at the trading post. What can I do? She asked. He looked up, seemed about to say she should rest, then reconsidered. Coffee's on the shelf there, pots by the stove. If you want to make some, I wouldn't say no. It was such a small thing, such a simple thing, but it was the beginning of something. Meilin found the coffee, found the pot, filled it with water from the bucket by the door. As she worked, Caleb continued his tasks, and they moved around each other in the small space with surprising ease. Within an hour, the cabin had come fully to life. Fire burning bright, coffee brewing, supplies stored, Meilin's trunk in the bedroom, everything in its place. They sat at the table with their coffee, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows, and Meilin realized something that made her chest tight. For the first time in 10 years, she wasn't afraid. Not of being hit, not of being mocked, not of doing something wrong and facing punishment. She was just here, in this small cabin in this vast valley, with a man who asked her opinion and valued her work and saw her as something other than a mistake to be hidden away. Tomorrow I'll show you around the property, Caleb said, wrapping his hands around his coffee cup. Introduce you to Bessie and the chickens, show you where everything is, then we'll figure out how to make this work. How to make what work? This, us. He met her eyes. I know this isn't a normal marriage. We barely know each other. But I meant what I said about partnership. You're not my servant. You're not decoration. You're my wife, or you will be once we can get to town for the ceremony. That means we figure this out together. Meilin felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back. I don't know how to be in a partnership. Neither do I. A hint of a smile touched his mouth. Guess we'll learn together. Outside, the sun was setting over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. The valley was settling into its evening quiet, the only sound the whisper of wind through the trees and the occasional low of cattle in the distance. And inside the cabin, Meilin Zhao, soon to be Meilin Hart, allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the family who'd sent her away as an insult had accidentally given her the greatest gift of her life, a chance to become who she was always meant to be. The first full day on the ranch began before dawn, when Meilin woke to unfamiliar sounds, the low of cattle in distant pastures, the clatter of someone moving around the main room, the crackle of a fire being built up in the stove. She dressed quickly in one of the dresses from the trunk, a practical dark blue wool that fit reasonably well with only minor adjustments needed at the waist. The fabric was sturdy, meant for work rather than display. Her mother's jade bracelet gleamed against her wrist as she fastened the buttons. When she emerged from the bedroom, Caleb was at the stove, frying eggs in an iron skillet. He glanced up, taking in the dress, and something like approval flickered across his face. Coffee's ready, he said, gesturing to the pot. Eggs will be done in a minute. Thought we'd eat before I show you around. They ate together at the wooden table, the morning light gradually strengthening through the windows. Caleb explained the day's plan between bites, a tour of the immediate property first, then introduction to the animals, then he'd need to ride out to check on the cattle in the far pasture. You can come with me if you want, he offered. Or stay here and settle in. Your choice. I'd like to see the property, Meilin said. All of it. He nodded, a hint of satisfaction in his expression. Good. You'll need to know the land if you're going to live on it. After breakfast, Caleb led her outside into the crisp morning air. The valley looked different in full daylight, bigger somehow, more real. Mountains rose on three sides, their peaks still heavy with snow, while the valley floor spread out in rolling pastures marked by split-rail fences. Ranch is about 800 acres, Caleb said, walking toward the barn. Not the biggest operation, but it's mine free and clear. No debt. Father made sure of that before he passed. He pointed northeast. Tom Breslin's place is that direction, about 5 miles. There's another homestead to the south, but they only come up in summer, use it for grazing. Otherwise, nearest neighbor is 15 miles to town. That's very isolated, Meilin observed. That's the point. He pulled open the barn door. Some people can't handle it. The silence gets to them, drives them a little crazy, feeling so small against all that space. And you? I prefer it. People are complicated. Land is honest. He stepped inside the barn, and Meilin followed. The interior smelled of hay and animals and leather. 4 stalls lined one side, 3 of them empty. In the 4th stood a brown and white cow who turned to regard them with large, suspicious eyes. That's Bessie, Caleb said. Fair warning, she's got opinions about everything. As if to prove his point, Bessie snorted and turned her back to them. Meilin couldn't help but laugh. She reminds me of my stepmother. Except Bessie's actually useful. Caleb grabbed a 3-legged stool and a bucket. Watch. I'll show you how to milk her, then you can try. He settled beside Bessie with practiced ease, and despite the cow's apparent disdain, she stood quietly while he worked. His hands moved with steady rhythm, streams of milk pinging into the bucket. It's all about pressure and timing, he explained. Too rough, and she'll kick. Too gentle, and you won't get anything. You have to find the balance. When the bucket was half full, he stood and gestured for Meilin to take his place. She settled onto the stool, feeling awkward and uncertain. Go ahead, Caleb encouraged. She won't hurt you, probably. Meilin reached out tentatively, trying to mimic the motion she'd seen. Nothing happened. Firmer, Caleb said. She's not made of glass. She tried again, squeezing harder, and was rewarded with a thin stream of milk. Then another. Within a few minutes, she'd found something like rhythm, though her technique was clumsy compared to Caleb's smooth efficiency. That's good, he said. Keep practicing and you'll get the feel of it. She needs milking twice a day, morning and evening. Can you handle that? Yes. Meilin finished filling the bucket, her hands already aching from the unfamiliar work. But there was satisfaction in it too. She'd done something useful. From the barn they moved to the chicken coop, a sturdy structure built against the south side of the barn to catch the winter sun. Inside, a dozen hens pecked and clucked, regarding Meilin with the same suspicion Bessie had shown. Eggs need collecting every morning, Caleb said, demonstrating how to reach under the hens without getting pecked. Sometimes twice a day in spring when they're laying heavy. The feed's in that barrel. They get a scoop morning and evening, plus whatever scraps you have from cooking. He handed her a basket, and Meilin carefully gathered the eggs while the hens complained loudly about the intrusion. 7 eggs. Not a large haul, but enough. They'll lay more come spring, Caleb said. Slow down in winter. That's just how it goes. They spent the morning covering every aspect of the immediate ranch. The root cellar dug into the hillside behind the cabin, its shelves lined with preserved vegetables and dried meat. The woodshed, stacked high with split logs. The well, deep and reliable, that never went dry. The garden plot, sleeping under snow but ready for spring planting. Caleb explained everything with patient thoroughness, never making her feel stupid for asking questions, always showing her the practical details she'd need to know. How to prime the pump, where the axe was kept for splitting kindling. Which fence post needed replacing come spring. By midday, Meilin's head was spinning with information, but she was beginning to see how the ranch worked as a whole. Everything connected. Every task led to another. It was a complete system, carefully balanced, requiring constant attention. You hungry? Caleb asked as they returned to the cabin. Starving. He smiled, an actual smile this time, not just a hint at the corner of his mouth. Good. Hard work builds an appetite. That's how you know you're doing it right. They made lunch together, falling into an easy partnership. Meilin sliced bread while Caleb fried leftover bacon. She set the table while he made fresh coffee. Small domestic tasks, but there was something profound in the ordinariness of it. No one criticized her knife work. No one complained about the way she arranged the plates. It was just work. Simple and honest. "This afternoon I need to ride out to the north pasture," Caleb said as they ate. "Check on the cattle, make sure the water source hasn't frozen over. It's about 3 hours round trip." He paused. "You want to come, or would you rather stay here?" Meilin considered. Part of her wanted to see more of the ranch, to understand the full scope of it, but another part recognized an opportunity. "I'd like to stay," she said. "Start settling in properly. Maybe work on altering some of those dresses to fit better." Caleb nodded. "Makes sense. There's a sewing kit in the cabinet by the window. My mother's. Got needles, thread, scissors, everything you might need." He hesitated. "You'll be all right here alone?" "I think so." "Fire needs tending every few hours. Don't let it go out. Getting it started again in this cold is hard work. And if anyone comes by, don't open the door unless you know them. Tom might stop by, or his wife Sarah. But anyone else, you just stay inside." "You're expecting trouble?" "No, but I'm cautious." He stood, clearing his plate. "I'll be back before dark." Meilin watched from the cabin door as he saddled one of the horses, a steady gray gelding named Smoke, and rode off toward the northern fence line. He sat the horse well, moving with the animal rather than against it, comfortable in a way that spoke of years in the saddle. Then he crested a rise and disappeared, and Meilin was alone. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, listening to the silence. It was profound, almost physical. No city sounds, no voices from other rooms, no stepmother calling orders or Yoon complaining about imagined slights. Just wind, and the occasional distant low of cattle, and the vast empty sky pressing down on the valley. It should have been frightening. Instead, it felt like freedom. Meilin returned inside and assessed her situation. The cabin was clean but sparse, functional rather than comfortable. It needed a woman's touch, her stepmother would have said, though Meilin suspected her stepmother would have fainted at the very idea of living somewhere so plain. But Meilin looked around and saw potential. She started with the bedroom, unpacking her single trunk properly. Her few belongings looked pathetic spread across the dresser. A hairbrush, 2 ribbons, a small mirror with a cracked corner. But adding them to the space made it feel more like hers. Then she turned to the trunk of her mother-in-law's things. Besides the dresses, she found undergarments, a warm cloak, 2 shawls, and at the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, a set of delicate china teacups. Meilin lifted one carefully, turning it in the light. It was beautiful, hand-painted with tiny flowers, the kind of thing that had no place on a frontier ranch. Yet someone had brought it here, had valued it enough to pack it carefully and carry it across miles of rough country. Caleb's mother, she realized, holding on to a piece of her old life, a reminder that she'd once been someone other than a rancher's wife on the edge of nowhere. Meilin understood that impulse completely. She washed the cups carefully and set them on the shelf in the main room, a small touch of beauty in the practical space. Then she turned her attention to the dresses. The blue one she wore fit reasonably well, but the others needed significant alteration. Meilin had learned to sew young, her birth mother had taught her, and later her stepmother had assigned her all the household mending as punishment. She'd hated it then, resented every stitch. But now, sitting by the window with good light and her mother-in-law's sewing kit, she found unexpected peace in the work. The rhythm of needle through fabric, the gradual transformation as shapeless cloth became something useful. She was taking in the waist of a brown wool dress when she heard hoofbeats outside. Meilin set down her sewing and moved to the window, heart suddenly racing. Caleb had said he'd be back before dark, but the sun was still high, and these were multiple horses. Through the window she saw 2 riders approaching, a man and a woman, both bundled against the cold. The man was Tom Breslin, she recognized. The woman must be his wife. Relief flooded through her. Caleb had said they might visit. She opened the door as they dismounted, and Tom swept his hat off with the same courtly gesture he'd shown the day before. "Afternoon, Mrs. Hart. Hope we're not intruding. My Sarah here insisted on meeting you right away, and you know how stubborn women can be." "I know how stubborn husbands can be," the woman, Sarah, retorted, swatting his arm. She was perhaps 50, with iron gray hair and a weathered face that creased into warm smile lines. "Don't mind him, dear. He's been insufferable since Caleb rode off with a bride. Had to come see for myself that you were real and not some story he'd made up." "I'm real," Meilin said, stepping aside. "Please, come in." Sarah entered with the confidence of someone who'd been in this cabin many times before, immediately moving to the stove to warm her hands. Her sharp eyes took in everything: the sewing by the window, the teacups on the shelf, the general tidiness. "You've made changes already," she observed. "Good ones. Place needed a woman's presence. Been too empty since Martha passed." "Martha was Caleb's mother?" Meilin asked. "That's right. Sweet woman. Never quite adjusted to frontier life, but she tried her best. Died of pneumonia about 8 years back, broke both men's hearts." Sarah accepted the coffee Meilin offered. "Tom tells me you came from San Francisco? That's quite a journey." "It was," Meilin said carefully, unsure how much to reveal. But Sarah's eyes were kind, and something in her expression suggested she saw more than she let on. "Well, however you got here, I'm glad you came. Caleb's been alone too long. Man needs partnership, not just solitude." Tom settled at the table, accepting his own coffee with a grateful nod. Sarah's been fretting about Caleb for years. Tried to match him with every unmarried woman in 3 counties. He turned them all down flat. "Because they were all wrong," Sarah said firmly. "Too soft for this life, or too eager to change him, or just plain unsuited." She studied Meilin over her coffee cup. "But you've got something different. Saw it yesterday when you sassed him. Caleb needs someone with spine." Meilin felt her cheeks warm. "I'm not sure I have much spine. I've spent most of my life being quiet and obedient." "Quiet and obedient isn't the same as spineless," Sarah said. "Quietness can be strength. Observing, learning, choosing your battles." She set down her cup. "Now then, I came to deliver an invitation. Dinner at our place 3 days from now. Give you a chance to meet some of the other ranch families, get your bearings before winter really sets in." "That's very kind, but no buts. You're part of this community now, and we take care of our own. Besides, I'm dying to cook for someone who'll actually appreciate it. Tom's taste buds died sometime in 1870. "They did not," Tom protested. "I appreciate your cooking just fine." "You once told me burned stew was interesting. It built character." Their bickering was clearly well-practiced, comfortable, the kind of teasing that came from decades together. Meilin felt a pang watching them. This was what partnership looked like when it had time to grow roots. "I'll ask Caleb," she said. "But if he agrees, I'd be honored to come." "Good girl." Sarah stood, brushing down her skirts. "Now, before we go, you need anything? Supplies running low? Any questions about how things work around here?" "Actually," Meilin hesitated, "I was wondering about the garden. Where's best to plant in spring? What grows well in this climate?" Sarah's face lit up. "Oh, honey, I could talk about gardening for hours. Come spring, I'll bring you seeds and cuttings from my own plants. You'll want root vegetables mainly: carrots, turnips, potatoes. They store well for winter. Some herbs by the kitchen door. Maybe some flowers if you want beauty along with practicality." "Flowers?" Meilin had never considered that she might be allowed something purely for pleasure. "Every woman needs flowers," Sarah said firmly. "Even out here. Especially out here. Martha used to say flowers were proof that beauty could survive anything if you gave it half a chance." They talked for another hour. Sarah sharing advice about surviving frontier winters. Tom telling stories about the early days of the territory, both of them painting a picture of a community that was small but tight-knit, hard but honest. When they finally left, promising to see her at dinner in 3 days, Meilin stood in the doorway watching them ride away. She felt less alone than she had that morning, less adrift. The afternoon shadows were lengthening when Caleb returned, riding Smoke at an easy pace. Meilin met him at the barn, taking the horse's reins while he dismounted with a grunt of fatigue. "How was it?" she asked. "Good. Cattle are fine. Water's holding. Found a weak spot in the north fence I'll need to repair tomorrow." He stretched, his back cracking. "How was your afternoon?" "Productive. I altered 2 of the dresses, started learning the sewing kit, and Tom and Sarah stopped by." Caleb's eyebrows rose. "Sarah wasted no time, did she?" "They invited us to dinner, 3 days from now." "You want to go?" Meilin considered. The old her would have said no automatically, would have avoided any situation where she might be judged or found wanting. But something had changed in the past few days. Yes, she said, I'd like to meet the neighbors properly. Then we'll go. Caleb led Smoke into the barn, beginning the work of unsaddling. Fair warning, Sarah's going to ask you 1,000 questions. She's the unofficial mayor of gossip for 50 miles in any direction. She seems kind. She is, but she's also nosy as hell and twice as stubborn. He hefted the saddle onto its rack. Still, if you're going to live out here, you'll need friends. Sarah's a good one to have. They worked together to bed down the horse, Meilin learning the evening routine. Fresh water, a measure of oats, a quick brush to remove the day's sweat and dirt. Simple tasks, but they created a rhythm. Inside, Meilin prepared dinner while Caleb tended the fire and the evening chores. She'd found dried beans and salt pork in the stores, and she made a simple stew, adding wild onions and herbs the way she'd seen Caleb do on the trail. It wasn't fancy, but when they sat down to eat, Caleb ate 2 full bowls and complimented the seasoning, and Meilin felt a quiet pride she'd never experienced in her father's house. After dinner, as they sat by the fire drinking coffee, Caleb pulled out a leather-bound book and began reading. Meilin watched him from the corner of her eye, curious. "What are you reading?" she finally asked. He showed her the cover. "Shakespeare, The Tempest. My mother used to read it aloud. Always liked the language." You read Shakespeare?" She couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Caleb's mouth quirked. "What, ranchers can't appreciate literature?" "No, I'm sorry. That was rude." "It's all right. Most people assume cowboys are illiterate, but my mother made sure I had an education. Reading, writing, mathematics. She said frontier life was hard enough without adding ignorance to it." He held the book out to her. "You want to read some?" Meilin took it carefully, running her fingers over the worn cover. In her father's house, her books had been burned. Here, a rough rancher was offering to share Shakespeare. The irony wasn't lost on her. She read aloud, stumbling a bit over the archaic language, and Caleb listened with eyes closed, a slight smile on his face. When she finished the scene, he nodded. "You read well. Your family educated you?" "My birth mother did. She believed women should be as educated as men. After she died, my stepmother disagreed, but by then I'd already learned to love books." Meilin closed the volume gently. "I had to hide my reading from her." "Well, you don't have to hide it here. Got a whole shelf of books. Read whatever you want." It was such a small thing, such a simple permission. But to Meilin, it felt like a gift beyond measure. The days began to establish a pattern. Meilin would wake before dawn to Caleb already moving around the cabin. They'd share breakfast, then divide the day's work between them. She took over the chickens and Bessie completely, along with the household tasks, cooking, cleaning, mending. He handled the heavier ranch work, checking cattle, repairing fences, chopping wood, but they worked together more than apart. Caleb taught her to read the weather, to understand the rhythms of the land. She taught him that meals could be more than just fuel, that care and preparation made a difference. They talked more as the days passed. Not constantly. The silence between them remained comfortable, but enough to begin sketching the outlines of each other's lives. Caleb told her about growing up on the ranch, about his mother's homesickness and his father's stoic determination, about the winter that killed half their cattle and nearly broke them, about slowly rebuilding after his father's death, learning to run the place alone. Meilin, more hesitantly, told him about her childhood in San Francisco, about her mother's death and her father's quick remarriage, about the gradual realization that she'd become invisible in her own home, valued only when she could be useful or blamed. She didn't tell him everything. Some humiliations were still too raw, too shameful. But she told him enough, and he listened without judgment, without platitudes, just accepting her story as truth. The night before the dinner at the Breslins, Meilin stood in front of the small mirror in her bedroom, examining her reflection critically. The altered brown dress fit well now, practical and neat. Her hair was pulled back in a simple braid. She wore her mother's jade bracelet. She looked like a frontier wife. Competent, capable, not beautiful perhaps, but no longer the frightened girl in the inadequate pink dress. There was a soft knock on the bedroom door. "You ready?" Caleb's voice, careful not to intrude. "Yes." Meilin took a deep breath and opened the door. Caleb stood in the main room wearing clean clothes, still work clothes, but brushed and mended. He'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair. He looked uncomfortable, like a man playing dress-up. "You look nice," Meilin said. "You too." His ears reddened slightly. "I mean, the dress. It fits well. You did good work on it." They stood there awkwardly for a moment, two people still learning how to exist together. "We should go," Caleb finally said. "Sarah gets insulted if anyone's late." The ride to the Breslin Ranch took about 40 minutes. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of rose and gold, and Meilin found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the wagon, into the quiet presence of the man beside her. "Nervous?" Caleb asked. "A little. I've never been good at social situations. These aren't San Francisco society people. They're ranch families. Plain speaking, practical. They'll judge you on your character, not your appearance or your manners." "That might be worse," Meilin admitted. "At least I knew the rules of society. I'm not sure I know these rules." "There's only one rule out here. Be honest and pull your weight. You're already doing both." The Breslin Ranch was larger than Caleb's spread, with a main house that had clearly been added onto several times over the years. Light glowed from every window, and as they approached, Meilin could hear voices and laughter. Her stomach tightened with anxiety. Caleb must have sensed it because his hand briefly touched hers. "You'll be fine, and if it gets too much, just give me a look and we'll leave early." "You do that?" "You're my wife, or will be once we can get to a preacher. That means I look out for you. Always." The simple certainty in his voice steadied her. Sarah met them at the door, pulling Meilin into a brief hug before ushering them inside. The house was warm and crowded with people. Ranch families from up and down the valley, all eager to meet the woman who'd finally gotten Caleb Hart to settle down. Meilin was introduced to what felt like dozens of people. Jim and Eleanor Watson, who ran the ranch to the south. The McGregor family, parents and 4 rowdy children. Old Pete Sanders, who'd been in the territory since before it was a territory. The young Cooper couple, newlyweds themselves, who looked at Caleb and Meilin with the knowing smiles of people who recognized fellow travelers. The questions came fast. Where was she from? How did she meet Caleb? What did she think of the territory? Could she cook? Did she ride? Was she planning children? Meilin answered as best she could, trying to navigate between honesty and privacy, aware that every word she spoke would be analyzed and reported throughout the valley. But to her surprise, the scrutiny didn't feel cruel. These people were genuinely curious, genuinely welcoming. They teased Caleb mercilessly about finally finding someone who'd tolerate him, but the teasing was affectionate. Dinner was a chaotic affair, multiple tables pushed together, food passed family style, conversations overlapping. Meilin found herself seated between Sarah and Eleanor Watson, both women plying her with food and advice in equal measure. "Don't let Caleb convince you that beef is the only thing worth raising," Eleanor said, passing a bowl of potatoes. "Sheep do well in this climate too, and the wool brings good money." "Ignore her," Sarah countered. "Eleanor's been trying to convert the whole valley to sheep for 20 years. Cattle are more reliable." "Cattle are more stubborn, you mean?" "That too." Across the table, Caleb was deep in conversation with Tom and Jim Watson about spring calving strategies. He looked more relaxed than Meilin had seen him, comfortable in this world of practical talk and shared challenges. After dinner, while the men gathered by the fireplace and the children rampaged through the house, the women pulled Meilin aside for what Sarah called proper conversation. "Now then," Sarah said, settling into a chair with a cup of coffee, "tell us truly, how are you managing? Caleb's a good man, but he's been alone a long time, set in his ways." "It's an adjustment," Meilin admitted. "Everything is so different from what I knew, but he's patient, kind. He treats me with respect." "That's more than some women get," Eleanor said darkly. "My Jim's a good man too, but he had to be trained out of some bad habits early on. Took a cast iron skillet and a firm talking to." The women laughed, sharing stories of early marriage challenges, and Meilin felt some of her tension ease. These weren't the vicious society women of San Francisco looking for weakness to exploit. They were offering genuine fellowship, hard-won wisdom from years of frontier life. "The isolation will be the hardest part," an older woman named Martha Collins said. "Winters especially. Days go by without seeing another soul. Some women can't take it. They go a little strange in the head. How do you manage it? Meilin asked. Keep busy, give yourself projects. Sarah knits enough to clothe half the territory. Eleanor does beautiful quilting. I keep journals. Been writing every day for 30 years now. Martha's eyes grew distant. And you hold tight to the people you have, your husband, your neighbors. We're scattered, but we're family out here. Have to be. As the evening wore on, Meilin found herself genuinely enjoying the gathering. The children's energy, the adults' easy camaraderie, the sense of community built not on social standing, but on mutual survival. This was what she'd never had in San Francisco. Real connection, unforced and unpolished. It was late when she and Caleb finally said their goodbyes, the wagon loaded with packages Sarah had pressed on them. Preserved fruit, fresh bread, a jar of honey, Eleanor's knitted socks. You did well tonight, Caleb said as they headed home under a sky brilliant with stars. They were kind, Meilin said. Kinder than I expected. Out here, kindness isn't weakness. It's survival. We help each other because we have to. No one makes it alone. He paused. You seem comfortable, more comfortable than I've seen you. Meilin considered that. I think I was myself tonight, not trying to be someone else, not hiding, just myself. That's good. That's who you should be. They rode in comfortable silence, the wagon creaking, the horse's breath steaming in the cold air. When they reached the cabin, Caleb helped her down and they stood for a moment looking at their home, light glowing from the windows, smoke rising from the chimney. It's strange, Meilin said softly. 3 weeks ago I was in San Francisco, and this place didn't exist for me. Now it feels like I've been here forever. You belong here, Caleb said it simply, as if it were a fact rather than an opinion. Belonged from the moment you stepped off that wagon. Inside, they moved through the evening routine with the ease of long practice. Banking the fire, checking the locks, setting coffee for the morning. Small domestic rituals that marked the end of one day and preparation for the next. At her bedroom door, Meilin paused. Caleb? Yeah? Thank you. For tonight. For bringing me into your world. It's your world too now. He met her eyes. And for what it's worth, I think you made it better just by being in it. He retreated to the ladder leading to his loft, leaving Meilin standing alone with those words echoing in her head. In her room, she changed into a nightgown and sat on the edge of the bed, touching her mother's jade bracelet. The stone was cool and smooth, a tangible link to the past. But for the first time, the past felt less important than the present, less real than the life she was building in this small cabin on the edge of nowhere. Outside, the wind whispered through the valley, carrying the scent of snow and pine and endless possibility. And somewhere above, in the loft, Caleb settled into sleep, trusting her with his home, his routines, his quiet life. The daughter they'd sent away as an insult was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone who knew her own worth, not because anyone had told her, but because she'd proven it to herself with every egg collected, every meal cooked, every fence mended, every choice made. Meilin lay down and pulled the quilts up, warm and safe, and for the first time in her life, exactly where she was meant to be. Winter deepened over the valley, bringing with it storms that lasted for days and temperatures that turned breath to ice crystals in the air. The world contracted to the cabin and barn, to the narrow paths Caleb carved through snowdrifts each morning, to the warm glow of lamplight against endless white. Meilin had never experienced cold like this. In San Francisco, winter meant rain and fog, a damp chill that seeped into bones, but never this savage assault of wind and ice. Here, exposed skin could freeze in minutes. Water left outside turned solid overnight. The cattle huddled in sheltered valleys, and even hardy Bessie complained about the short journey from barn to pasture. But inside the cabin, life took on a different quality. Intimate, purposeful. The work of survival created its own warmth. Meilin learned to read the weather like Caleb did, watching how the light changed before a storm, how the cattle behaved when the pressure dropped. She learned to bank a fire so it would last through the night, to make coffee strong enough to cut the morning chill, to cook meals that would stick to ribs and sustain hard work in brutal conditions. And slowly, almost without noticing, she and Caleb were building something more than cohabitation. They were building partnership. One morning in mid-February, Meilin woke to find fresh snow falling again, heavy flakes that obscured everything beyond the cabin windows. Caleb was already up, stoking the fire, moving quietly to let her sleep. She dressed quickly in layers, wool stockings, flannel petticoat, the practical brown dress, a shawl over everything. When she emerged, Caleb had breakfast ready, oatmeal with dried fruit and honey, strong coffee that steamed in the cold air. "Storm's going to be bad," he said without preamble. "Could last 2-3 days. I need to get out to the north pasture, make sure the cattle haven't gotten stuck in a drift. Might be gone most of the day." Meilin looked out at the blowing snow. "Is it safe?" "Safe enough if I'm careful. Done it before." He finished his coffee and stood, already reaching for his heavy coat. "You'll be all right here alone?" She wanted to say no, wanted to ask him to stay where it was warm and safe, but she understood ranch life now. The cattle couldn't wait. Nature didn't care about convenience or fear. "I'll be fine," she said. "I'll keep the fire going, tend to Bessie and the chickens. Maybe work on that quilt I started." "Good." He paused at the door, something unspoken in his expression. "If the storm gets worse and I'm not back by dark, don't come looking. I'll find shelter and wait it out. Understand?" "Caleb, promise me, Meilin. The worst thing you could do is get lost in a whiteout trying to find me." She swallowed hard. "I promise." He nodded once, pulled his hat low, and stepped out into the storm. Through the window, Meilin watched him disappear into the swirling white, leading smoke toward the barn, and felt fear settle cold in her stomach. The morning passed slowly. She did her chores mechanically, collected eggs from irritated hens, milked Bessie, who seemed to sense the storm and gave her milk grudgingly, hauled water from the well before the windlass froze solid. Every task took twice as long in the deep snow and bitter wind. Back inside, she stoked the fire and tried to focus on the quilt she was piecing together from fabric scraps. Sarah had taught her the pattern, a simple log cabin design that would provide warmth and beauty, both. But her stitches were uneven, her mind wandering to Caleb out in the storm. By midday, the wind had picked up, howling around the cabin corners, rattling the shutters. Snow piled against the north wall in drifts that reached the windowsills. Meilin added more wood to the fire and heated soup for lunch she didn't really want. The afternoon stretched endlessly. She tried reading Shakespeare but couldn't focus on the words. She baked bread, kneading her anxiety into the dough, shaping it into loaves that rose by the fire. She mended socks and shirts, her needle moving in automatic rhythm while her ears strained for the sound of hoofbeats that never came. Darkness fell early, the way it did in deep winter, and still Caleb hadn't returned. Meilin lit lamps and placed them in the windows, beacons in case he was out there lost, looking for home. She made coffee and kept it hot on the stove. She put together a simple dinner, beans and bacon and fresh bread, and kept it warming. And she waited. The wind screamed now, a living thing trying to tear the cabin apart. Snow rattled against glass like thrown sand. Meilin sat by the fire, the quilt abandoned in her lap, and faced a truth she'd been avoiding for weeks. She cared about Caleb, deeply. Somewhere between this trading post and now, between awkward silences and shared coffee, between being strangers and being partners, she'd come to care about this quiet man who'd chosen her when no one else would. The thought of him out there, frozen, hurt, dying alone in the snow, was unbearable. She stood and paced to the window for the 100th time, pressing her forehead against the cold glass, seeing nothing but her own reflection and the darkness beyond. "Please," she whispered to the storm, to fate, to whatever force governed this harsh land. "Please let him come home." As if in answer, she heard it, faint beneath the wind's howl, but unmistakable. The sound of a horse. Meilin grabbed a lantern and threw open the door, the wind nearly tearing it from her hands. Snow blasted into the cabin, stinging her face, but she held the lantern high, peering into the storm. Two shapes materialized from the white. Smoke, ice-crusted on his mane, and Caleb hunched in the saddle, barely visible beneath snow and ice. "Caleb!" She set the lantern down and waded through the drifts to reach him. He half fell from the saddle, stiff with cold, his movements clumsy. Meilin caught his arm, steadying him, and was shocked by how frozen he felt even through layers of clothing. "Get inside," he managed through chattering teeth. I'll tend smoke." "No, I'll do it. You get inside now." For once he didn't argue. Meilin helped him to the cabin door, practically pushing him through it, then turned to the horse. Smoke looked as exhausted as his master, head low, flanks heaving. But horses couldn't wait, couldn't thaw by a fire while someone else handled the work. She led him to the barn, her hands already numb despite gloves. Inside the barn, sheltered from the worst of the wind, she worked with fumbling fingers to remove the saddle, to rub down the horse's frozen coat, to get him water and feed. It took 3 times longer than it should have, but she refused to do it poorly. When she finally stumbled back to the cabin, covered in snow and shaking with cold, she found Caleb still in his wet clothes, trying to build up the fire with hands that wouldn't quite obey him. "Stop," she ordered, pulling off her own frozen outer layers. "You need to get out of those clothes now. You're going to freeze to death in your own house. I'm fine. You're not fine. You can barely move your fingers." She grabbed blankets from the bedroom and thrust them at him. "Strip out of everything wet, wrap yourself in these, and sit by the fire. That's not a request." Maybe it was the tone, the same tone Sarah used when she brooked no argument, or maybe he was simply too cold to fight. Either way, Caleb obeyed, fumbling out of his ice-stiffened coat and shirt, while Meilin turned her back to give him privacy. She heard the rustle of fabric, the heavy drop of wet boots, a sharp intake of breath that might have been pain. Then silence. "I'm decent," he said, his voice rough. She turned to find him wrapped in blankets, sitting close to the fire, still shaking with cold. His lips had a bluish tinge, his face was wind-burned raw, and his eyes held a glassiness that frightened her. Meilin poured hot coffee and pressed the cup into his hands, guiding it to his mouth when his grip faltered. He drank in small sips, grimacing as the heat hit his system. "What happened out there?" she asked, draping another blanket around his shoulders. "Found the cattle. They'd gotten trapped in a ravine, couldn't get out through the drifts. Took hours to dig them out, get them to safer ground." He cradled the coffee cup, his hand slowly regaining color. "Then the storm got worse. Couldn't see 10 feet. Smoke and I got turned around, ended up going in circles before I finally found landmarks I recognized." "You could have died." "But I didn't." He looked up at her, some of the glassiness fading. "And the cattle are safe. That's what matters." Meilin wanted to scream at him that he mattered, that cattle weren't worth his life, that she'd spent the entire day sick with fear, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she ladled soup into a bowl and made him eat, watching to make sure he actually swallowed. She checked his fingers and toes for frostbite, relieved to find them merely frozen, not damaged. She heated water and made him soak his hands, ignoring his protests that he was fine, that she was fussing too much. "I spent all day terrified you were dead in a snowdrift," she finally said, her voice tight. "Let me fuss." That stopped his protests. He soaked his hands in silence, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. As the evening wore on and the warmth gradually returned to his body, the shaking stopped and color returned to his face. Meilin made him eat again, bread and beans, simple and hot, and wouldn't let him do anything but sit by the fire and recover. She moved around the cabin with purpose, tending to tasks that didn't need tending, burning off the residual fear that still thrummed in her veins. Finally, when there was nothing left to do, she sat in the chair across from him and let herself simply breathe. "I'm sorry," Caleb said quietly, "for worrying you. You were doing what had to be done. Still, I should have realized what it would be like for you, waiting here alone." Meilin looked at him. This man who'd ridden into a killer storm to save cattle, who'd nearly frozen to death doing what he saw as his duty, who was apologizing for making her worry. "When you didn't come back," she said slowly, "I realized something." "What's that?" "That this has become real. This marriage, this partnership. You're not just the man who chose me when no one else would. You're," she faltered, searching for the right words, "you're the person I'd miss if you were gone." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside, something shifted between them. "I'd miss you too," Caleb said finally. "More than I expected to when I wrote that letter. More than I thought possible, actually." He set down his coffee cup and met her eyes directly. "Meilin, I know this started as a practical arrangement. I needed a wife. You needed to escape your family. But somewhere along the way, it became more than that, at least for me." Her heart was pounding. For me too. I don't want you to feel pressured, he continued. I know we said we'd get properly married when we could reach town, but with the weather, that won't be possible until spring. And I know we're still learning each other. But I want you to know, this isn't temporary for me. You're not temporary. Meilin stood and crossed to him, kneeling beside his chair so they were eye to eye. I don't want temporary either. I want… She took a breath. I want this. Us. This life we're building. Not because I have nowhere else to go, but because this is where I choose to be. Caleb reached out, his hand still warm from the fire, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, careful, full of unspoken feeling. Then we'll make it official come spring, he said softly. Proper ceremony in town with witnesses and everything. But as far as I'm concerned, you've been my wife since you said yes at that trading post. And you've been my husband since you saw me as something other than what my family told you to see. They stayed like that for a long moment, the fire warming them both, the storm raging uselessly outside. Then Meilin stood and held out her hand. You need sleep, real sleep in a real bed. Not up in that loft where the cold seeps through. Caleb looked at her hand, then at her face. You sure? I'm sure. She led him to the bedroom, her bedroom, now theirs, and they lay down together fully clothed with blankets piled high against the cold. It was innocent, practical, two people sharing warmth and comfort, and the simple miracle of not being alone. Caleb fell asleep almost immediately, exhaustion and cold finally claiming him. But Meilin lay awake for a while longer, listening to his steady breathing, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. The girl who'd been sent away as an insult had found something her family would never understand. Not just shelter or survival, but genuine partnership with someone who saw her true worth. And in the morning, when she woke to find Caleb already up and moving, recovered and strong, making coffee like the storm had never happened, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The weather broke 3 days later, the sun emerging brilliant and merciless, turning the snow to diamonds. Caleb dug out paths from the cabin to the barn, from the barn to the well, creating channels through drifts that reached past Meilin's waist. Life returned to its rhythms, but something had changed. They moved around each other with greater ease now, spoke more freely, touched more often in passing. Small things, his hand on her shoulder as he reached past her for the coffee, her fingers adjusting his collar before he headed outside, the way they'd started sitting closer together in the evenings. A week after the storm, Tom Breslin arrived with news. Road to town's finally passable, he announced, stomping snow from his boots. Took a crew of us 3 days to clear it, but you can get through now if you're careful. Thought you'd want to know. Caleb glanced at Meilin. We should go. Get the marriage done legal, and we need supplies. Flour's running low, and we're almost out of coffee. I can come with you. Keep an eye on the place while you're gone, Tom offered. Sarah was going to visit anyway, bring some of that jam she put up last fall. So 2 days later, bundled against the lingering cold, Meilin and Caleb set out for redemption. The town was small, barely more than a wide spot in the road with a general store, a saloon, a hotel, and a white clapboard church that served multiple denominations depending on which traveling preacher happened through. But it was civilization, connection to the wider world, and Meilin felt a flutter of nervousness as they approached. The last time she'd been in public, really public, with strangers who might judge her, was the trading post where her family had tried to humiliate her. You all right? Caleb asked, reading her tension. Just nervous. Don't be. These are good people, and you're with me. The simple certainty in his voice steadied her, the way it always did. They went first to the general store, where Caleb introduced Meilin to the proprietor, a round woman named Mrs. Chen, who took one look at Meilin and burst into a stream of Cantonese so rapid that Meilin could barely follow. Finally, someone I can talk to properly, Mrs. Chen exclaimed, switching to English when she saw Meilin's confusion. I've been in this territory for 15 years, and do you know how many other Chinese women I've met? 3. And 2 of them moved away. She grabbed Meilin's hands. You must come visit, please. I'm desperate for conversation that doesn't involve cattle prices and weather. Meilin found herself smiling. I'd like that. They spent an hour in the store buying supplies while Mrs. Chen peppered Meilin with questions and offered unsolicited advice about surviving frontier life. When they finally left, loaded down with flour and coffee and dried goods, Caleb was shaking his head. She talked more in 1 hour than I've heard in 5 years of buying supplies. She's lonely, Meilin said. I understand that. You're not lonely anymore, though, are you? She considered the question honestly. No, I'm not. The preacher was a circuit rider named Reverend Matthews, currently staying at the hotel between stops. He was a weathered man in his 60s who'd clearly spent decades riding frontier trails, with kind eyes and a practical manner. Heard you two were coming, he said when they found him. Sarah Breslin sent word. She's very excited about this wedding. It's nothing fancy, Caleb said quickly. We just need it done legal. Legal and binding, that's my specialty. Matthews pulled out a worn Bible and a ledger. Now then, do you have witnesses? Need at least 2. I'll stand witness, Mrs. Chen called from across the hotel lobby, where she'd apparently followed them. And I'll get Henry from the telegraph office. He loves weddings. Before Meilin quite knew what was happening, she was standing in the hotel parlor with Caleb beside her, Mrs. Chen and a young man named Henry as witnesses, and Reverend Matthews opening his Bible. Dearly beloved, he began, then paused. Actually, let's skip the fancy parts. You two have been living as man and wife already, yes? Yes, Caleb confirmed. And you're here to make it proper and legal in the eyes of the law? We are. Good enough for me. Matthews looked at Caleb. Do you take this woman as your lawful wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, in sickness and health, till death parts you? I do. Caleb's voice was steady, certain. And do you, Matthews turned to Meilin, take this man as your lawful husband under the same terms? Meilin looked at Caleb, at his weathered face and steady gray eyes, at the man who'd seen value in her when no one else would, who'd taught her what partnership meant, who'd nearly frozen saving cattle because that's what the work demanded. I do, she said clearly. Then by the power vested in me by the territory and every denomination that lets me speak for them, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride, Caleb, though I suspect that's not news to either of you. Caleb turned to Meilin, a question in his eyes. She answered by rising on her toes and kissing him softly, briefly, a seal on promises they'd already been living. Mrs. Chen cheered. Henry clapped. Reverend Matthews made them sign the register, gave them a certificate, and pronounced them legal. And just like that, Meilin was truly, officially married. They celebrated with dinner at the hotel, the 4 of them plus Reverend Matthews, who told outrageous stories about frontier weddings he'd performed over the years. Mrs. Chen insisted on paying for everything, declaring it her wedding gift, and made Meilin promise to visit at least once a month. As the sun set and they prepared to head back to the ranch, Meilin stood outside the hotel, looking at the marriage certificate in her hands. Official, legal, real. Having second thoughts? Caleb asked quietly. No? She folded the certificate carefully. Just thinking how strange life is. 3 months ago, I was the unwanted daughter in San Francisco. Now I'm Mrs. Caleb Hart, legal wife of a Wyoming rancher, with friends and a home and a purpose. Regret any of it? Not one bit. She looked up at him. Do you? Only that I didn't punch your father when I had the chance. The vehemence in his voice surprised her into laughter, and they rode home through the twilight talking and laughing like the newlyweds they technically were. March arrived with the first hints of spring, days growing longer, snow beginning to melt in the valleys, early birds returning to scout nesting sites. The world was still cold, still hard, but life was stirring beneath the frozen surface. Meilin stood in the doorway one morning, coffee cup in hand, watching the sunrise paint the mountains pink and gold. Behind her, she could hear Caleb moving around the cabin, the familiar sounds of their shared morning routine. Thinking about the garden? He asked, joining her in the doorway. Yes. Sarah said I should start planning now. Decide what to plant where. The plot's about 30 by 40 feet. Good soil. My mother worked it for years before the illness took her strength. Should grow just about anything that can survive this climate. I want vegetables we can preserve for winter, Meilin said slowly, her mind working through possibilities. But also herbs for cooking, and flowers, definitely flowers. Flowers? He said it like he was tasting the word. My mother would have liked that. She always said a house without flowers was just a shelter, not a home. Meilin turned to look at him. Tell me about her. Your mother. You've mentioned her, but I don't really know who she was. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. Then he began to speak. Her name was Martha Ann Preston, before she married my father. She was from Boston, old family, good education, everything refined and proper. Met my father when he went back east to buy breeding stock. He was rough and honest and completely different from the men she knew. She fell in love with him, hard and fast from what she told me. Her family disowned her when she married a frontier rancher, warned her she'd regret it. She came west anyway, gave up everything for him. He paused. And I think part of her did regret it. Not him, but the life, the isolation, the hardship. She tried to make the best of it, but you could see the homesickness in her sometimes. That must have been difficult for you to watch. It was harder on my father. He loved her desperately, but he didn't know how to make her happy, didn't know how to give her what she'd lost. Caleb's voice roughened slightly. Before she died, she made me promise something. Said I should find a wife who chose this life clearly, with open eyes. Not someone running from something, but someone running toward it. He looked at Meilin directly. I thought that meant finding someone refined and educated like her. Someone who'd bring culture and beauty to the ranch. Took me years to realize I was looking for the wrong thing. What were you supposed to look for? Strength. Honesty. Someone who could face hard truths and not break. His hand found hers. Someone like you. Meilin felt tears prick at her eyes. I was running from something, though. My family. My old life. No. Caleb squeezed her hand gently. You were running toward yourself. Toward the person you could have been all along if anyone had let you. That's different. They stood together in the doorway, watching the sun climb higher, and Meilin understood something profound. She hadn't just found a husband. She'd found the first person who truly saw her, not as a disappointment or a tool or a problem to solve, but as herself, complete and valuable exactly as she was. I'm going to make this ranch bloom, she said suddenly, surprising herself with the vehemence in her voice. The garden, the house, everything, not because it needs to be fancy, but because beauty and strength can exist together. Because your mother was right, a home needs both. Caleb smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. Then I'd better get started turning the garden plot as soon as the ground thaws. It's going to be a busy spring. Spring arrived slowly, fighting winter for every inch of ground. The snow retreated in patches, revealing brown grass and muddy earth. Ice broke up on Hart Creek with sounds like rifle shots, the water running fast and cold with snowmelt from the mountains. The cattle grew restless, sensing the change in seasons, and the chickens began laying with renewed enthusiasm. Meilin threw herself into preparing the garden with an intensity that surprised even her. She sketched plans on precious paper, mapping out where each crop would go, which herbs needed sun, and which preferred shade. Sarah brought seeds saved from last year's harvest, along with cuttings from her own established plants. Eleanor Watson contributed potato starts and onion sets. Mrs. Chen, on one of Meilin's monthly visits to town, pressed packets of Chinese vegetables into her hands. Bok choy, gai lan, snow peas, she said, pointing to each packet. They'll grow here if you're careful. Start them inside, transplant when the danger of frost passes. And these, she added packets of flower seeds, for beauty. Never forget beauty. By late April, the garden plot had been turned and amended with aged manure from the barn. Caleb had built raised beds for the vegetables, sturdy frames that would extend the growing season by warming the soil faster. Meilin started seeds in tin cans on the windowsill, watching them sprout with fierce pride. Every morning she checked on her seedlings, turning them toward the light, keeping the soil moist but not waterlogged. Every evening she studied them for signs of growth, celebrating each new leaf as a small victory. You talk to those plants more than you talk to me some days, Caleb observed one night, watching her fuss over a particularly stubborn tomato seedling. Plants need encouragement, Meilin said seriously. Sarah told me her grandmother always sang to her garden, Said it made things grow better. You planning to sing to the vegetables? Maybe, when you're not around to hear it. He laughed, and the sound still surprised her sometimes. How much lighter he'd become over the months. How the hard edges had softened without losing their strength. It was a good life they were building. Hard work from dawn to dusk, simple meals, quiet evenings by the fire. But there was satisfaction in it, a rightness that Meilin had never felt in her father's mansion with all its luxury and refinement. She was precisely where she was meant to be. Then, on a bright May morning, when Meilin was transplanting her seedlings into the garden beds, carefully spacing each one according to her plans, she heard hoofbeats on the road. Multiple horses moving at an easy pace. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and felt her blood turn to ice. A carriage was approaching. Not a ranch wagon or a simple buckboard, but an elegant enclosed carriage pulled by matched horses, completely out of place on the rough frontier road. Behind it rode two men on horseback, hired guards by the look of them, rough and watchful. Meilin knew that carriage. She'd ridden in it countless times in San Francisco, enduring her stepmother's complaints about every bump and jostle. Her family had found her. She stood frozen for a moment, dirt on her hands and knees, wearing a simple work dress and apron, her hair braided back practically. Everything about her proclaimed what she'd become. A rancher's wife, a woman who worked with her hands, someone her family would consider hopelessly common. The old fear tried to rise up, the ingrained response to bow her head and accept whatever they demanded. But something stronger pushed back against it. This was her home, her land, her life. They had no power here. Caleb emerged from the barn, alerted by the sound of horses. He took in the carriage, the guards, and crossed the yard to stand beside Meilin with deliberate casualness. But she could feel the tension in him, coiled and ready. "You know them?" he asked quietly. "Yes." The carriage stopped in front of the cabin. One of the guards dismounted and opened the door, and Zhao Wei stepped out, followed by Meilin's stepmother and Yun. They looked exactly as Meilin remembered, expensively dressed, perfectly groomed, radiating the certainty of people who'd never been truly denied anything. But here, against the backdrop of the working ranch with its practical buildings and honest dirt, they looked ridiculous, overdressed actors on the wrong stage. Her father's eyes found her, and something like triumph flashed across his face. Then he took in her appearance, the work dress, the dirt, the complete absence of jewelry except for her mother's jade bracelet, and his expression shifted to barely concealed contempt. "Meilin," he said, switching to Cantonese, "we have much to discuss." "We can speak English," Meilin replied in that language, her voice steady. "My husband doesn't speak Cantonese, and he has a right to hear anything you have to say to me." Zhao Wei's jaw tightened at the subtle defiance, but he switched to English. "Very well, we have traveled a great distance to find you. I trust you are ready to return to civilization." "I'm not going anywhere." "Don't be ridiculous. Look at you, working in the dirt like a common laborer. This is not the life we arranged for you." "You didn't arrange anything for me," Meilin said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "You sent me away as an insult, expecting me to be rejected and returned. That I've made a life here instead wasn't part of your plan." Her stepmother stepped forward, her perfumed handkerchief already pressed to her nose, as if the very air offended her. "We are willing to overlook your stubbornness. Your father has been very generous in his forgiveness." "Forgiveness for what?" "For the embarrassment you caused, for accepting this arrangement, when you should have had more pride." She glanced at Caleb with barely disguised disdain. "But we understand you were desperate, lost. We're prepared to take you back." "I said I'm not going anywhere." Yun spoke for the first time, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Dear sister, surely you don't want to stay here, living in this tiny cabin, doing manual labor, married to a man who can barely provide for you. Come home. Father has even found you a proper husband, a merchant's son who's willing to overlook your situation." Overlook what situation?" Caleb's voice cut through the conversation, quiet but edged with steel. "The fact that she's already married? To me?" Zhao Wei turned his attention to Caleb, as if noticing him for the first time. "Mr. Hart, I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer. We will pay you triple the original bride price to annul this marriage. You can keep what you've already been paid, plus receive additional compensation for your time and trouble. In return, you will sign papers releasing Meilin from this arrangement. No, Caleb said flatly. I haven't named a figure yet. Doesn't matter what the figure is, the answer is no. Be reasonable, Mr. Hart. Surely you can see this marriage was a mistake. Meilin is not suited for this life. She comes from refinement, from culture. She belongs in San Francisco, not on some remote ranch. She belongs wherever she chooses to be, Caleb said, and she's chosen here. Meilin felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, at the absolute certainty in his voice. Zhao Wei's expression hardened. I am her father. I have certain legal rights. She's a married woman. Your rights ended when she said, I do, in front of a preacher and witnesses. It's legal and binding, registered with the territory. You have no claim on her. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Zhao Wei's face. He clearly hadn't expected resistance, had assumed his money and authority would be enough. He tried a different approach, turning back to Meilin and switching to Cantonese again. You don't understand. We need you. English, Meilin insisted. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of my husband. Zhao Wei's face flushed with anger, but he complied. Fine. Since you insist on airing family business publicly, we need you because of the land. What land? There have been rumors about silver deposits in this area, very valuable deposits, and it appears they may be located on or near your husband's property. He gestured toward the ranch as if the whole thing was beneath notice. Of course, a simple rancher wouldn't know how to properly exploit such a resource, but with the right partnerships, the right investors, this land could be worth a fortune. Understanding crashed over Meilin like cold water. They hadn't come to rescue her from hardship. They'd come because they saw opportunity. You want access to the ranch, she said slowly. Through me. We want what's best for the family, and you are still family, despite your foolish choices. Zhao Wei's voice took on a wheeling tone. Think, Meilin. With proper investment, this land could provide wealth beyond anything your husband could achieve alone. We could develop it properly. Bring in real miners, establish operations. No, Meilin said. You haven't heard the terms. I don't need to hear the terms. This is my husband's land, his family's land. We're not turning it into some mining operation to line your pockets. Don't be stupid, girl. Her stepmother's voice turned sharp. You have a chance to finally be useful to this family, to make up for all the years you were nothing but a burden and an embarrassment. This is your opportunity to prove you have some value. The words were designed to hurt, to tap into the old wounds, to reduce Meilin back to the frightened girl who believed she was worthless. But that girl didn't exist anymore. I already have value, Meilin said quietly. I have worth, and I don't need to prove it to you. Yun laughed, a cruel sound. Value? Look at yourself. You're covered in dirt, dressed like a peasant, living in a shack. You think you have value because you can milk a cow and plant vegetables? That's not value. That's desperation. It's honest work, Meilin said. Something you wouldn't understand. Honest work? Yun's voice rose. You were always so proud of being different, so convinced you were better than us because you read books and had ideas. But look where it got you. Buried in the middle of nowhere, married to a man who probably can't even read. I can read just fine, Caleb interrupted, his voice dangerously quiet. Shakespeare, actually, among other things, and I'd appreciate you not insulting my wife or my home. Your home is a hovel, Zhao Wei snapped, his patience clearly exhausted. Your land is being wasted on cattle when it could produce real wealth, and my daughter is living like a servant when she could return to proper society. She's not your daughter anymore, Caleb said. She's my wife, and she's made it clear she wants to stay here, so I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We're not leaving without what we came for, one of the guards said, stepping forward with his hand resting casually on his gun. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Caleb didn't move, didn't react visibly, but Meilin felt the shift in him. You threatening me on my own property? Just making sure everyone understands the situation, the guard said. The situation, Tom Breslin's voice came from behind the carriage, is that you're trespassing and making threats, both of which are frowned upon in these parts. Meilin looked past her family and saw Tom sitting on his horse about 20 yards away, his rifle resting casually across his saddle. How long he'd been there, she didn't know, but his presence changed the dynamics completely. This is family business, Zhao Wei said. but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Family business ended when you threatened violence, Tom said. Now it's territorial business. And in the territory, we protect our own. Your own? Yoon looked around incredulously. You're defending this situation? Defending a hardworking ranch family from aggressive outsiders trying to intimidate them off their land. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing. Zhao looked between Tom, Caleb, and Meilin, clearly calculating his options. This isn't over, he finally said. We have resources, connections. We can make life very difficult for you. You can try, Caleb said, but we're not going anywhere, and neither are you unless you want Tom to escort you off at gunpoint. The standoff lasted another long moment. Then Zhao gestured sharply to his guards. Get back in the carriage. We're leaving. Father, Yoon started to protest. I said we're leaving. His voice was sharp with humiliation and rage. This isn't the place to resolve this. Her stepmother turned to Meilin one last time. When you come crawling back, begging to return, we won't take you. Remember that. This is your last chance to be part of this family. I'm already part of a family, Meilin said, moving closer to Caleb. Just not yours. She watched them climb back into the carriage, watched the guards mount up with obvious reluctance, watched the whole elaborate procession turn and head back down the road. She stood there until they disappeared from view, until even the dust settled before she let herself breathe. Then her legs gave out. Caleb caught her before she hit the ground, holding her steady while reaction shook through her body. She wasn't crying. There were no tears, just a bone-deep trembling as the confrontation caught up with her. You're all right, Caleb murmured. You're safe. They're gone. Tom dismounted and walked over, his expression concerned. You need me to stay? Sarah can manage without me for a while. No, Meilin managed, finding her voice. Thank you for coming. How did you know? Saw them pass my property heading this direction. Fancy carriage like that, guards with guns? I figured they weren't bringing good news. He shifted his rifle. You want me to send word to the sheriff? What they did? Threatening violence? That's illegal. No, Caleb said. They're gone. Let's leave it at that for now. After Tom left, promising to check back the next day, Meilin and Caleb returned to the cabin. Her hands were still shaking as she tried to make coffee, spilling grounds across the counter. Let me, Caleb said gently, taking the scoop from her. You sit. She sat at the table and watched him move through the familiar motions. When he set the cup in front of her, she wrapped both hands around it, seeking the warmth. I'm sorry, she said. I brought this to your door. They wouldn't be here if not for me. They're here because they're greedy and saw an opportunity. That's not on you. But the silver, is it true? Are there deposits on your land? Caleb sat across from her, his own cup steaming. Maybe. There have been rumors for years. My father had the land surveyed once, found some promising signs, but nothing worth developing. Even if there is silver, mining it would destroy the ranch, turn the whole valley into a wasteland of pits and tailings and poisoned water. Would you ever consider it? Mining, I mean? He looked at her steadily. Would you want me to? Meilin thought about the valley as she'd come to know it, the creek running clear and cold, the cattle grazing on clean grass, the garden she was planting, the life they were building. She thought about the mining camps she'd heard about, lawless, violent places that devoured the land and the people, then moved on, leaving nothing but scars. No, she said firmly. This land is worth more as it is. This life is worth more. Then that settled. He reached across the table and took her hand. Your family might try again. They might cause trouble. But we'll handle it together. They called this place a hovel, called our life worthless. Do you believe them? She looked around the cabin, at the shelves she'd organized, the curtains she'd sewn, the growing collection of small comforts they'd accumulated. She thought about this garden waiting outside, the chickens that knew her voice, Bessie's grudging acceptance, the neighboring families who'd welcomed her without question. No, she said, I don't believe them at all. The confrontation with her family cast a shadow over the next few days, but Meilin refused to let it derail the life she was building. She returned to her garden with renewed determination, transplanting seedlings with fierce care, as if each plant was a small act of defiance. The garden became her sanctuary. Hours passed as she worked the soil, pulled weeds, adjusted stakes and supports. She learned which plants thrived and which struggled, which needed more water and which preferred to be left alone. The bok choy and snow peas flourished, creating a small corner of her heritage in the frontier soil. The tomatoes grew strong and sturdy. The herbs spread their fragrance every time she brushed past them. And the flowers exceeded every expectation. By mid-June, color blazed along the garden's borders. Cosmos and zinnias, marigolds and sunflowers, all chosen for their hardiness but beautiful nonetheless. Meilin would sometimes stop in the middle of her work just to look at them, marveling at how something so delicate could survive in such a harsh climate. Your mother would have loved this, she told Caleb one evening as they walked through the garden together, inspecting the day's progress. She would have, he agreed. She always said beauty was an act of hope, that planting flowers in hard ground was a way of saying you believed in the future. Meilin looked up at him. Do you believe in the future? Our future? More than I've believed in anything. He gestured toward the thriving garden, the well-kept cabin, the ranch spreading out around them. Look at what you've built here in just a few months. Imagine what it'll be in a year, in 5 years, in 20. The vision took shape in her mind, the garden established and mature, producing abundantly, the ranch growing and prospering, perhaps children running through the yard, learning the land the way Caleb had, a life built on honesty and hard work and partnership. It was a future worth fighting for. One afternoon in late June, Sarah arrived with news that pulled Meilin from her gardening reverie. There's talk in town, Sarah said without preamble, settling at the kitchen table with the coffee Meilin had automatically poured. About your family. Meilin felt her stomach tighten. What kind of talk? They've been making inquiries about land rights, mineral rights, territorial laws regarding property and marriage. They've hired a lawyer, some fancy man from Denver, and he's been asking questions. They're not going to give up, Meilin said quietly. Doesn't look like it. But here's the thing. The whole town knows what they tried. Tom told the story at the saloon, and you know how fast news travels. Most folks aren't inclined to help outsiders trying to strong-arm one of our own. Sarah's expression hardened. Especially not Chinese families. The last part stung, but Meilin understood. Prejudice cut both ways, and while the frontier was more accepting than many places, it still harbored deep suspicions of outsiders, particularly those who looked different. What do we do? She asked. You keep living your life, keep building your home, keep being part of this community. Sarah reached across the table and squeezed her hand. And if they try anything legal, we fight back, together. You've got the whole valley behind you, honey. Don't forget that. After Sarah left, Meilin stood at the window, watching the sun set over the mountains. She felt Caleb come up behind her, his presence solid and reassuring. Heard what Sarah said, he murmured. I'm scared, Meilin admitted. Not for myself, but for what they might do to you, to the ranch. This is your family's legacy, and I've brought trouble to it. You've brought life to it. Everything else we'll handle. He turned her to face him. Meilin, listen to me. Whatever happens, whatever they try, we're in this together. You're not facing them alone. You're not protecting me from them. We're protecting each other and what we've built. Understand? She nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. Good. Now come help me with dinner. Tom's bringing some fresh trout he caught this morning, and I promised him your dumplings. The simple domesticity of the request steadied her. This was real. Cooking dinner, sharing meals with friends, tending the garden, maintaining the ranch. Her family's machinations felt distant and unreal compared to the solid weight of daily life. July brought the height of summer, long days of heat and brilliant sun, the garden exploding with growth. Meilin harvested her first vegetables with pride that bordered on reverence. Snow peas crisp and sweet, lettuce tender and fresh, radishes with a perfect bite. She served them at dinner, watching Caleb's face as he tasted the first produce from her garden. This, he said after the first bite, is better than anything I've had in years, maybe ever. It's just vegetables. It's vegetables you grew, from seeds you started and seedlings you transplanted and plants you tended. There's a difference. There was a difference, Meilin realized. These weren't just vegetables purchased at a market. They were the product of her labor, her learning, her partnership with the land. They were proof that she could create could nurture, could make things grow in hard ground. They were hope made edible. The community noticed the garden too. Women started stopping by to see it, to ask advice, to trade cuttings and seeds. Meilin found herself becoming a resource, someone people came to with questions about growing techniques and plant varieties. It was a role she'd never imagined, but one that fit her surprisingly well. Mrs. Chen visited monthly now, always bringing something: spices from her store, dried mushrooms, news from town. They would spend hours talking in a mixture of Cantonese and English, sharing recipes and stories, two Chinese women finding connection in an unlikely place. "You look happy," Mrs. Chen observed one afternoon, watching Meilin move through her garden with confident ease. "Different from when I first met you, stronger." "I feel stronger," Meilin admitted, "like I'm finally becoming who I was supposed to be all along." "And your family? The trouble?" "Still circling. Sarah says they're still asking questions, still looking for leverage, but they haven't tried anything direct since that first visit." "They will," Mrs. Chen said darkly. "Men like your father don't give up easily, especially when they think money is involved. You be careful." The warning proved prophetic. On a hot August afternoon, when Caleb was out checking the northern fence line and Meilin was in the garden harvesting tomatoes, a lone rider appeared on the road. Not her family this time, but a neatly dressed man on a good horse, carrying a leather satchel that marked him as professional rather than working class. He dismounted at the fence line and called out politely, "Mrs. Hart, I'm looking for Mrs. Meilin Hart." Meilin set down her basket and approached cautiously. "I'm Meilin Hart." "Excellent. My name is Richard Morton. I'm an attorney representing the Zhao family." He pulled papers from his satchel. "I have documents here that require your signature. May I approach?" Every instinct screamed at Meilin to refuse, to send him away, to wait for Caleb. But she forced herself to remain calm. "What kind of documents?" "Your father is willing to settle the matter amicably. He's prepared to offer a very generous sum in exchange for mineral rights to this property. You would retain ownership of the land itself, continue to live here, but any mining operations would be conducted by investors who know what they're doing." He smiled, all professional charm. "It's really quite fair. Everyone benefits." "No." The smile faltered. "Perhaps you should review the terms before—" "No," Meilin repeated firmly. "I don't need to review anything. This is my husband's land, and we're not selling mineral rights to my father or anyone else." "Mrs. Hart, I don't think you understand the legal complexities here. As a married woman, you have certain property rights through your husband. If you were to sign these documents—" "I said no." She crossed her arms. "Now, please leave." Morton's professional facade cracked slightly. "Your father was right about you, stubborn and foolish. Do you have any idea how much money you're refusing? How much easier your life could be?" "My life is already easy enough," Meilin said, "and it's mine. That's worth more than any amount of money." "You'll regret this. When your father files suit to claim what's rightfully his—" "Nothing here is rightfully his," a new voice said. Meilin turned to see Caleb riding toward them on Smoke, Tom Breslin beside him on his own mount. Both men had clearly been alerted to the visitor and came prepared. Morton took in the two ranchers and seemed to recalculate his approach. "Mr. Hart, I was just explaining to your wife the very generous offer her family is making regarding mineral rights." "My wife already gave you an answer," Caleb said, dismounting, "and I'll give you the same one. No, now get off my property. This is a legal matter, and we have our own lawyer if it comes to that, but right now this is a private property matter, and you're trespassing." Caleb's voice remained level, but there was steel beneath it. "Leave, now." Morton gathered his papers with poor grace, mounted his horse, and rode off with a final warning about legal consequences. After he disappeared, Meilin let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "They're not going to stop." "No," Caleb agreed. "They're not. But neither are we." That evening, Caleb rode into Redemption and returned with a stern-faced man named Jacob Wheeler, a territorial lawyer who'd handled land disputes for 20 years. Wheeler sat at their kitchen table, reviewing the papers Morton had left behind, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is aggressive," he said finally, setting the documents down. "They're claiming that because the marriage contract was entered under false pretenses, specifically that Zhao Wei intended to send a different daughter, the union is invalid. If the marriage is invalid, then any property rights Meilin has through marriage are also invalid. That's ridiculous, Caleb said. The contract said daughter. It didn't specify which one. And we have a legal marriage certificate, witnessed and registered. I agree. Their case is weak. But weak doesn't mean they won't try it. Wheeler leaned back in his chair. Here's what concerns me more. They're also filing a claim that Meilin is mentally incompetent to make decisions about property because she's under undue influence. They're arguing that you, Mr. Hart, have manipulated her into refusing their generous offers. Meilin felt cold wash through her. They're trying to say I'm not capable of making my own choices? It's a common tactic when dealing with married women and property. Ugly, but sometimes effective, especially if they can find a sympathetic judge. Wheeler pulled out fresh paper and began making notes. We need to build a strong countercase. Documentation of your competence, testimony from neighbors about the quality of your marriage, proof that you're an active participant in ranch decisions, not a puppet. That shouldn't be hard, Tom said from where he stood by the door. Whole Valley knows Meilin runs half this ranch better than most men could. Her garden's the talk of 3 counties. She handles the household finances. She's made decisions about stock and feed. She's competent as hell. Good. We'll need sworn statements to that effect. Wheeler made more notes. We'll also need to document the original marriage arrangement, any correspondence, any witnesses to the initial agreement. The trading post keeper, Meilin said suddenly. He was there when my family tried to substitute Yoon for me. He heard the whole thing. Excellent. I'll write up there and get his statement. Wheeler gathered his papers. In the meantime, you two keep living your lives exactly as you have been. Don't let them intimidate you into changing anything. The stronger your partnership looks, the weaker their case becomes. After Wheeler left, Meilin sat at the table staring at the documents her father's lawyer had left behind. The legal language was dense and confusing, but the intent was clear. Her family wanted to prove she was incapable of making her own decisions so they could make those decisions for her. It was her entire childhood in San Francisco condensed into legal arguments. The constant message that she was incompetent, unworthy, incapable of managing her own life. They'd said it so many times she'd almost believed it, but she didn't believe it anymore. They're going to lose, she said quietly. Caleb looked up from stoking the fire. What? They're going to lose. Because I'm not the girl they think I am. I'm not incompetent or manipulated or incapable. She stood, moving to the window where she could see her garden in the twilight, the plants thriving under her care. I've built something here, something real, and I'm not letting them take it away. No, Caleb agreed, coming to stand beside her. We're not. The next weeks were a flurry of preparation. Wheeler returned with a statement from the trading post keeper that corroborated Meilin's version of events. Sarah, Tom, Eleanor, Mrs. Chen, and a dozen other neighbors provided sworn testimony about Meilin's competence and character. The Reverend Matthews wrote a letter confirming the marriage was entered into freely by both parties. But the most powerful evidence came from the ranch itself. Wheeler suggested documenting everything Meilin did, every decision she made, every aspect of ranch life she managed. So Caleb began keeping detailed records. Meilin's garden production, her management of the household accounts, her care of the livestock, her contributions to ranch decisions. The numbers told a story of partnership, of a woman who'd learned a new life and excelled at it, of someone who'd transformed a bachelor's rough cabin into a thriving homestead. This is compelling, Wheeler said, reviewing the documentation. But I want something more, something that demonstrates beyond doubt that you're capable of independent thought and action. Like what? Meilin asked. Do you have any plans? Any projects you've been considering? Anything that would show forward thinking and business acumen? Meilin thought about the conversation she'd had with Sarah about expanding the garden, about maybe growing vegetables to sell at the market in Redemption. She thought about the chickens and how she'd been considering increasing the flock to sell eggs commercially. Small plans, things she'd been turning over in her mind but hadn't yet mentioned to Caleb. I want to expand, she said slowly. Okay, the garden is producing more than we can eat or preserve. I want to grow specifically for market and increase the chicken flock. There's demand in town for fresh eggs. Mrs. Chen says she could sell everything I produce. Wheeler's eyes lit up. That's perfect. Write it up. A proper business plan with projected costs and income. Show me you can think like a businesswoman, not just a housewife. That night, Meilin sat at the kitchen table with paper and pencil, working through the numbers. How many additional chickens would she need? What would they cost to feed versus the income from eggs? Which vegetables had the best market value? What would she need to invest in seeds, in preservation equipment, in transportation to town? Caleb sat across from her, helping with the mathematics, but the ideas were all hers. By midnight, she had a plan, modest but solid, showing clear understanding of investment, risk, and return. This is good, Caleb said, reviewing her work. Really good. Why didn't you mention it before? I wasn't sure you'd want me to. It's your ranch, your resources. Our ranch, he corrected. Our resources. And if you can turn a profit selling eggs and vegetables, that's money we can use to improve the place. Maybe expand the herd, fix the barn roof, whatever we need. He looked at her seriously. Meilin, you don't need my permission to have ideas or make plans. We're partners. That means your thoughts matter as much as mine. The words settled into her chest, warm and permanent. Partnership. Not just in name, but in truth. She submitted the business plan to Wheeler, who pronounced it exactly what they needed. Then they waited for the legal proceedings to begin. The summons came in early September. Zhao had filed suit in territorial court, claiming the marriage was invalid and seeking to have Meilin declared incompetent to manage property. The hearing was scheduled for October 15th in the territorial capital. That gives us 5 weeks to prepare, Wheeler said. We'll need character witnesses, people willing to travel to testify on your behalf. We'll all go, Sarah declared when the news spread. The whole valley, if necessary. Let them see what kind of community supports you. True to her word, when the day of the hearing arrived, Meilin and Caleb didn't travel alone. Tom and Sarah came, along with Eleanor and Jim Watson, Mrs. Chen, the Reverend Matthews, even old Pete Sanders, who rarely left his ranch. They made a procession, ranch families in their best clothes, people who'd taken time away from crucial fall work to support one of their own. The territorial courthouse was an imposing building, all stone and authority. Inside, the courtroom smelled of old wood and older laws. Meilin sat at the defendant's table beside Caleb and Wheeler, acutely aware of her family on the opposite side. Zhao, her stepmother, Yun, and their expensive Denver lawyer. The judge was a weathered man named Aldrich, who'd been on the bench for 30 years. He looked at the assembled parties with the expression of someone who'd seen every variation of human foolishness and wasn't impressed by any of it. Mr. Morton, he said to the Denver lawyer, you may present your case. Morton stood, all polished confidence, and laid out the argument. The marriage contract had been entered under false pretenses. Meilin was clearly under the undue influence of a man who saw opportunity in a vulnerable woman. She'd refused generous financial offers that any reasonable person would accept, proving she wasn't thinking clearly. Her family, out of concern and love, was trying to protect her from making decisions that would harm her future.